14th, 1943, 200 miles east of Cape Hatteras, where the Atlantic Ocean turns from blue to black in the depths below. Oberleutnant Klaus Bergmann stood in the conning tower of U-576, his hands gripping the cold steel railing as the American destroyer charged toward him like an angry god. 28 years old, 3 years of war behind him, a wife named Greta waiting in Leipzig, a daughter he had never seen, born 3 months after he sailed on his first patrol. The destroyer was close enough now that Klaus could see individual sailors on her deck, close enough to count the depth charge racks, close enough to know that in 30 seconds, maybe 40, everything he knew would end in crushing darkness and cold Atlantic water. He had time for one thought, just one. It was not about Germany or the fatherland or even about victory. It was this: my wife will never know what happened to me. Then the first depth charge exploded. The world became sound and violence. The submarine lurched sideways like a wounded animal. Metal screamed against metal. Men screamed against the roar of incoming water. Klaus felt his body thrown against the bulkhead, felt the air punch from his lungs, felt the submarine begin her final dive into the darkness that had claimed so many others before her. But this time something different happened. The submarine did not sink fast enough. The pressure hull cracked but held. Emergency ballast blew, and somehow impossibly U-576 broke surface one last time, water pouring from her wounds, dead in the water, but alive enough for 47 men to scramble onto her deck before she finally surrendered to the ocean. Klaus was the last man off. He went into the water expecting to die there. The Atlantic in May is cold enough to kill a man in 20 minutes. But the American destroyer was already launching boats, already sending sailors to pull German submariners from the sea, already doing something Klaus had been taught was impossible. They were rescuing their enemies. 3 hours later, Klaus Bergmann opened his eyes in the mess hall of USS Bainbridge, wrapped in an American wool blanket, staring at a plate of food that made no sense to him whatsoever. Bacon, eggs, toast, real butter. Coffee that smelled like something other than burnt acorns and chicory. An American sailor young enough to be in high school set the plate down in front of him. The boy had freckles and red hair and eyes that seemed too innocent for war. His uniform was clean. His face was unlined. He looked like he had been eating well his entire life. The sailor gestured at the food. His voice was cheerful, almost apologetic. "Sir, that's genuine Iowa pork bacon. My dad raises the hogs back home. It ain't poisoned or nothing. It's just breakfast." Klaus stared at the plate. He had been trained for this moment. 3 months of indoctrination before his first patrol. They had told him that Americans would try to break him with kindness, that their food would be drugged or poisoned, that accepting anything from them was a betrayal of everything Germany stood for. But the smell, God in heaven, the smell of that bacon. Klaus had not eaten real meat in 8 months. U-boat rations were black bread that tasted like sawdust, canned sardines that made men vomit, and a gray paste the crew called food only because they had no other word for it. 3 months ago, the cook had served something he claimed was sausage. 2 men got food poisoning. The rest refused to eat it. Now Klaus sat staring at bacon that looked and smelled like something from a memory of better days. His hands were shaking, not from cold, not from shock, from hunger so deep it had become part of his bones. He picked up the fork. His training screamed at him to refuse. His pride demanded that he push the plate away. But his body, his traitorous, starving body, moved his hand forward and lifted a piece of bacon to his mouth. The taste hit him like a physical blow. It was not just food. It was proof of something he had been refusing to believe. It was evidence of a lie so vast that accepting it meant questioning everything he thought he knew about the war, about Germany, about himself. This bacon was real, rich, perfectly cooked. The kind of food his mother used to make on Sunday mornings before the war, before the shortages, before everything good disappeared from Germany and was replaced with substitutes and rations in the slow grinding hunger that became normal. And the Americans were giving it to their prisoners. Klaus's eyes filled with tears. He tried to stop them. Failed. Across the table, 3 of his officers stared at him in horror. Kapitänleutnant Ernst Hoffmann, who had survived 8 patrols and feared nothing, looked at Klaus like he was watching his commander lose his mind. The young American sailor shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you okay?" Klaus swallowed, tried to speak. His English was good learned in gymnasium before the war, but the words came out broken by something he could not control. In 3 years of war, he said slowly, I have eaten food that tastes like fuel oil. This tastes like food, real food. How does America feed prisoners better than Germany feeds its commanders? The American sailor blinked. He seemed genuinely confused by the question, as if feeding people properly was so obvious as it needed no explanation. Well, sir, Geneva Convention says we gotta treat prisoners right. And besides, my ma always said treating folks decent ain't about who they are. It's about who you are. Klaus put down his fork, looked at the remaining bacon on his plate, at the eggs still steaming, at the coffee that smelled like actual coffee instead of the burnt substitute they served on U-boats. He thought about his crew packed into that submarine for 3 months at a time, breathing air so foul it made men dizzy, eating food that barely kept them alive, told every day that they were fighting for a Germany that would lead the world, that would create a new order, that would prove German superiority over the weak and decadent Americans. And now he sat here, a prisoner of those weak and decadent Americans eating better than he had eaten in 3 years. Something cracked open inside Klaus Bergman that morning. Not his loyalty, not yet, not his sense of duty, but something deeper. A question he had never allowed himself to ask. What if they lied to us? What if everything they told us about America was a lie? The thought terrified him more than the depth charges had. Because if that was true, then what had the last 3 years been for? What had U-576 died for? What were 50,000 German soldiers dying for every month on the Russian front? Klaus looked up at the young American sailor. What is your name? Morrison, sir. Private Danny Morrison, from Des Moines, Iowa. How old are you, Private Morrison? 19, sir, enlisted last year right after Pearl Harbor. 19, the same age as Franz Weber Klaus's torpedo man, the same age as half his crew. Boys sent to kill other boys because old men in Berlin and Washington could not figure out how to talk to each other. Thank you for the bacon, Private Morrison. You're welcome, sir. Klaus ate slowly. Every bite was a revelation. Every taste was evidence. By the time he finished, he had made a decision. He would watch these Americans carefully. He would test them. He would look for proof that this breakfast was a trick, a deception, part of some elaborate American psychological warfare. He would look for proof that his training was correct. But part of him, the part that was still an engineer who believed in evidence and facts, already suspected what he would find. And that suspicion terrified him more than anything the war had shown him so far. The journey from Norfolk to Texas took 4 days by train. 4 days that taught Klaus Bergman more about America than 3 years of propaganda ever had. They moved at night, mostly 50 German prisoners, in a specially guarded railway car, traveling southwest through a country Klaus had only seen in films and newsreels. But even in darkness, even through barred windows, Klaus could see things that made no sense. Cities with lights blazing. No blackouts, no bomb damage. Streets full of cars, civilian cars, more cars than Klaus had seen in all of Germany before the war. And people, everywhere people, walking freely, shopping, living lives that seemed untouched by the war consuming Europe and the Pacific. At one stop somewhere in Virginia, an old woman came to the train. She was maybe 70, dressed in black, her face hard with anger. She spit at the window where Klaus stood. Her voice carried through the glass. My grandson died at Kasserine. Died because of you Nazi bastards. Klaus understood her rage, had expected it. What he did not expect was what happened next. An old man, maybe the woman's age, walked up beside her. He wore a faded uniform jacket, Great War vintage, American Expeditionary Force. He put his hand on the woman's shoulder. Margaret, they're prisoners now. War's over for them. They killed my Tommy. I know, but Tommy knew what he signed up for. These boys did too. Soldiers do their duty. That ain't personal. Then the old veteran did something Klaus would never forget. He looked directly at Klaus through the window and saluted. Not a German salute, an American one, clean and crisp and somehow respectful, despite everything. Klaus, without thinking, saluted back. The old man nodded once, then led the grieving grandmother away. Ernst Hoffmann, standing beside Klaus, spoke quietly. That makes no sense. His nation is at war with ours. We are his enemy, yet he salutes us. He saluted soldiers, Klaus said, not enemies. Maybe to him there is a difference. There, Klaus had no answer. The train rolled south through the Carolinas, through Georgia, through the pine forests and red clay earth of the American South, and with every mile Klaus felt his certainty crumbling. This was not the America he had been taught about, not the weak, divided mongrel nation that German propaganda promised would collapse under pressure. This was something else, something organized, something powerful, something that could fight a two-front war while keeping its cities lit and its civilians fed and its economy running. By the time they reached Texas, Klaus had stopped trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had been told. He would simply observe, collect evidence, make no judgments until he had more data. It was, after all, what engineers did. September 15th, 1943, the train slowed to a stop in a place called Hearne, Texas. Population maybe 5,000. A town so small Klaus could have walked across it in 20 minutes. But as he stepped off the train into heat that hit him like a physical wall, Klaus saw something that changed his understanding of what he was facing. Camp Hearne sprawled across 4,700 acres of Texas prairie, 50 barracks buildings, guard towers, administrative buildings, recreation areas. A camp that could hold 3,000 prisoners and looked more organized than most German military bases Klaus had seen. The Americans had built this in 6 months. Klaus's engineering mind did the calculations automatically. The resources required, the planning, the labor, the logistics of running a camp this size in the middle of nowhere. And he realized something that made his stomach tighten. Germany could not do this, could not build something like this so fast, could not maintain it, could not feed 3,000 prisoners the way these prisoners were apparently being fed, which meant Germany was not winning this war, could not win this war, would not win this war. The thought made Klaus want to vomit. Major William Crawford stood at the camp entrance, 6 feet 3 inches of Texas rancher in an American uniform. 45 years old, face weathered by sun and grief, eyes that had seen too much death but refused to become cruel. He gave his speech in English. An interpreter translated. But Klaus, listening to both versions, heard something the interpreter could not quite capture. A tone, a quality of voice, something that sounded almost like sadness. Gentlemen, you are now prisoners of the United States of America. Under the Geneva Convention, you will be treated with dignity. You will work. We need labor with our boys overseas. You will be fed. Same rations as American soldiers. You will be housed properly, and you will be treated fairly. That is the American way, even if you don't understand it yet. Klaus translated for his men in German, then added his own warning. He is lying. This is propaganda. Trust nothing. But then came the barracks tour. Real beds, not bunks, not hammocks. Actual beds with mattresses that did not smell like mildew and sweat. Running water both cold and hot, something Klaus had not experienced in 3 years except in rare port visits. Indoor plumbing, flush toilets, screen windows to keep out insects. Each man received a personal kit. Towel, soap that actually lathered, toothbrush with real bristles, a razor, clean clothes. 2 sets. Otto Schneider, the machinist, stood in the middle of the barracks holding his towel like it was made of gold. Klaus, this towel is better than the one I had at home. Klaus said nothing. His mind was cataloging costs. A camp this size, 3,000 prisoners, personal kits for each, food, water, medical care. The Americans were spending more per prisoner per day than the Kriegsmarine spent maintaining an entire U-boat. Why, that evening, the first dinner in Camp Hearne mess hall, fried chicken, golden brown crispy skins steaming hot, mashed potatoes with real butter pooling in the center, green beans, cornbread so fresh it was still warm, and for dessert, peach cobbler with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. Real ice cream. Klaus's 47 men sat at long tables staring at their plates like they were hallucinating. Some had tears in their eyes. None had eaten like this since before the war. Some had never eaten this well in their lives. Franz Weber, the 19-year-old torpedo man from Bavaria, looked at Klaus with desperate eyes. "Sir, permission to eat." Klaus wanted to order them to refuse, wanted to maintain discipline, wanted to prove that German soldiers could not be bought with food. But looking at those young faces, those hollow cheeks, Those bodies worn thin by 3 years of submarine rations, he could not do it. Eat, we need our strength. They ate, slowly at first, then faster, then with an intensity that was almost violent. Men who had gone hungry for so long, they had forgotten what satisfied felt like. Otto Schneider, tears running down his face, whispered through a mouthful of chicken. Klaus, I have not tasted chicken like this since before the war, since my mother's kitchen. This is real food. Franz Weber, face buried in his hands, shaking. My mother made peach cobbler. Every Sunday, I thought I would never taste it again. Around the mess hall, the same scene repeated. 47 hardened submariners, men who had faced death in the Black Atlantic depths, breaking down over fried chicken and peach cobbler. Breaking down because someone had fed them like human beings instead of military assets to be maintained at minimum cost. That night, Klaus sat outside his barracks, smoking an American cigarette the guards had provided. Looking up at Texas stars, the same stars he had navigated by from U-boat conning towers, but seeing them now without fear. Without the constant awareness that depth charges could come screaming down at any moment. Ernst Hoffman sat down beside him, lit his own cigarette, smoked in silence for a long minute. Klaus, what if everything they told us was a lie? Klaus did not answer immediately. He had been asking himself the same question since that first breakfast aboard USS Bainbridge. But saying it out loud made it real, made it treasonous, made it impossible to take back. What do you mean? They told us Americans were weak, cannot fight, cannot organize, are soft and decadent and individualistic. Ernst gestured at the camp around them. But they built this in 6 months. They feed 3,000 prisoners better than Berlin feeds its own citizens. They treat us better than our own officers treated us on the boats. Klaus, what if we are on the wrong side? The words hung in the night air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Klaus wanted to argue, wanted to defend Germany, wanted to say that everything they had fought for still mattered. But the engineer in him, the part that believed in evidence over ideology, could not find the words. Do not say that. We are German officers. We have our duty. Duty to what? To men who lied to us, who sent us to die while feeding us garbage and telling us we were supermen. Ernst's voice was quiet but intense. Klaus, I have survived 8 patrols. 8 times I should have died. And I thought I was surviving for something important. For Germany, for the fatherland. But now I think maybe I just survived for this. To be fed like a human being. To be treated with dignity. To learn that the enemy we were taught to hate is more humane than the leaders we were taught to follow. Klaus crushed out his cigarette, looked at his friend, saw the same doubt in Ernst's eyes that he felt in his own heart. We cannot know yet. We must watch, learn, collect evidence, then decide. And if the evidence proves them right and us wrong, Klaus had no answer for that, so he said nothing. And the 2 men sat in silence under Texas stars, feeling the foundations of everything they believed cracking beneath them like the pressure hull of a dying submarine. But then came the day that changed everything. The day they met the cowboys. 3 weeks later, Klaus and 8 of his crew stood in the back of a transport truck, armed guards beside them, heading away from Camp Hearn towards something called Coleman Ranch, work assignment, labor for local farms and ranches that had lost men to the war. Klaus expected slave labor, expected to be treated like criminals, expected cruelty now that they were away from the Geneva Convention observers at the main camp. What he got was Private Danny Morrison driving the truck, the same Iowa farm boy who had given him that first breakfast. 19 years old and still looking like the war had not quite touched him yet. Mr. Coleman's a good man, Danny said over his shoulder. Fair, works hard himself, expects the same from you, but treats folks right. His sons, Klaus asked. They fight 3 boys, all overseas, Jackson and Thomas in the Pacific. William was at Tarawa. Was, past tense. William died. Danny's jaw tightened. Yes, sir, November last year. Died on the beach, never made it inland. Klaus felt something twist in his chest. Understanding now why this rancher might hate them. Why this might be very different from the camp. The truck turned off the main road onto a dirt track that stretched toward a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. Texas was flat in a way that made Klaus dizzy after 3 years of seeing nothing but ocean and sky. But it was a different kind of vast. This was land. Solid, real, growing things. Coleman Ranch appeared gradually. First a windmill, then barns, then a house that looked like it had been there forever. Everything weathered but maintained. Everything worn but functional. The look of a place that had seen generations of hard work. Jesse Coleman stood at the ranch gate, 58 years old, 6'3", shoulders still broad despite age and grief, wearing work clothes, not a suit, hands scarred from a lifetime of ranch work, face that had seen too much Texas sun and too much loss. He looked at the truck, at the German prisoners climbing out. His expression was hard, unreadable. The face of a man who had buried a son 6 months ago and was now looking at soldiers who wore the same enemy uniform, even if they had fought in different theaters. These the Germans? Yes, sir, Mr. Coleman. Jesse walked up to Klaus, studied him, eyes that missed nothing. You an officer. I was commander of U-576, now I am prisoner. Submarine man, Jesse's voice was flat. Well, commander, you know anything about cattle? No, sir. Then you're about to learn. And if you're smart, you'll pay attention, because knowing how to work a ranch might save your life someday. Klaus did not understand what that meant, would not understand for years. But something in Jesse Coleman's voice made him listen. The first lesson was horses. Klaus had never been on a horse in his life, had seen them, of course, in Leipzig and during training, but never touched one, never been close enough to smell them or feel their heat or understand that they were not machines but living creatures with personalities and moods. Otto Schneider, the machinist, took one look at the horse Jesse brought out and went pale. Herr Coleman, I cannot. I have never... Nobody's born knowing how to ride, Jesse said through Danny Morrison's translation. You learn. Now come here. Jesse spent an hour teaching them how to approach a horse, how to let it smell you, how to touch it without spooking it, how to talk to it in a way that communicated calm and confidence. Horses like anybody else, Jesse said. You approach with respect, she'll respect you back. You come at her scared or aggressive, she'll know. And she won't trust you. Trust is everything on a ranch. Franz Weber, the young dairy farmer, approached the horse naturally. His hands moved with unconscious knowledge, touching the animal the way someone touches something familiar and loved. Jesse noticed. Son, you've done this before. My family had dairy cows in Bavaria before the war. Then why the hell were you on a submarine? Franz's face closed, the way all their faces closed when asked that question. They said I was needed for the fatherland. Jesse studied the boy for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fatherland's loss is my gain. You just became my top hand. Over the next 3 weeks, something unexpected happened. Jesse Coleman taught them to be cowboys, not as punishment, not as exploitation, as actual teaching. He showed them how to saddle a horse, how to mount, how to ride without fighting the animal, how to herd cattle without spooking them, how to fix fence posts and maintain water pumps and do the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. He worked beside them, not above them, not watching them, with them, his hands in the same dirt, his sweat mixing with theirs under the brutal Texas sun. Klaus fell off his horse 3 times the first day. Each time Jesse was there. Get back up. Cowboys fall. Quitters stay down. Which are you? Klaus got back up. By the end of the 3rd week, Klaus could ride well enough to help with herding, could fix a fence post, could operate the ranch equipment, and had developed something he never expected to feel for an American whose son had died fighting Germany's allies. Respect. Then came the Saturday evening that changed everything. Jesse Coleman stood at the ranch house door, looking at the 8 German prisoners finishing their work for the day. Y'all cleaned up yet? Danny Morrison translated the question. Klaus answered in English. Yes, sir. Then come on inside. Saturday night means proper dinner. War or no war, some things don't change. The prisoners looked at each other, suspicious, confused. Klaus spoke for all of them. Mr. Coleman, we are prisoners. You do not need to. I know I don't need to. I'm inviting you. There's a difference. Now come on, before the food gets cold. The dining room table could seat 12. Jesse had set all 12 places. On the table, grilled steaks from ranch cattle, baked potatoes with butter and sour cream, fresh cornbread, green beans from Jesse's garden. and an apple pie that filled the house with a smell that made Klaus's eyes water. Jesse Coleman bowed his head. Lord, bless this food in the hands that prepared it. Bless my boys overseas wherever they are. And bless these men here, enemy, though they may be, because they're still your children. Amen. Klaus did not pray, had not prayed since he was a child. The Kriegsmarine had no room for God in its cramped submarines. But something in Jesse's words reached into a place Klaus had thought was sealed off forever. They ate. The steak was perfect. The potatoes were rich. The cornbread was sweet. But what Klaus tasted was not just food. It was something else. Something he had not experienced since before the war. Home. After dinner, Jesse led them to his study. The walls were covered with photographs, and Klaus understood why Jesse had invited them. 3 sons in uniform. Jackson, 25, grinning under a Navy cap. Thomas, 23, serious in Marine Corps dress blues. William, 21, looking impossibly young in his combat fatigues. Below them, a photograph of a woman, Sarah Coleman, died 1939. Cancer. In an older photograph, a young man in an American Expeditionary Force uniform, 1918, Jesse's father. Jesse stood before the photographs like a man in church. My daddy fought Germans in France, Great War, came home saying Germans were the bravest soldiers he ever faced, respected them. When this war started, I wondered if I'd feel the same. He paused, looked at Klaus directly. Then my boys shipped out, and I just felt angry. Angry at every German who picked up a rifle, every Japanese who flew a plane, every enemy soldier who might be the one to kill my sons. And when William died at Tarawa fighting Japanese, I wanted to hate everyone who wasn't American. Didn't matter if they were German or Japanese or Italian. Just wanted to hate. Jesse's voice went quiet. But then you boys showed up. And I watched you work harder than most Americans I hire. Watched you take pride in good work. Watched you miss your families, same way my boys miss me. And I realized something my daddy tried to tell me 50 years ago. Klaus waited. War makes enemies, but it doesn't have to make monsters. Jesse reached behind the photographs, pulled out an envelope. Klaus could see it had been opened and read many times. Got this letter from Jackson 2 weeks ago. He's in a hospital in Australia. Wounded but alive. And you know who saved him? German doctor. Captured German doctor working in an Allied hospital. Jackson wrote to me about it. Jesse opened the letter, read slowly. Dad, the doc said he became a doctor to save lives, not take them. Even in war, he kept that promise. Fixed me up even though I was wearing the uniform of his enemy. Made me think about what you always said about treating people right. Made me think maybe you were smarter than I gave you credit for. He folded the letter carefully, put it back behind his son's photograph, looked at Klaus again. So here's what I'm thinking, Bob Mender. You boys know engineering, right? Mechanical work. Yes, sir, I was an engineer before the war. My tractor's been busted for 3 months. Parts shortage because of the war. Every mechanic in town got drafted. You fix it, I'll pay you. 80 cents a day. Geneva Convention says I can pay prisoners for skilled work. Might not sound like much, but it adds up. And more importantly, it's honest work for honest pay. Jesse extended his hand. That's the American way. And that's the way my son William believed in before he died. So if I'm going to honor his memory, I'm going to do it by living the values he fought for. Even if that means paying German prisoners to fix my tractor. Klaus looked at the offered hand, thought about everything he had seen since that first breakfast on USS Bainbridge, thought about the lie he had been told about America, about the truth he had discovered instead. He took Jesse Coleman's hand. I will fix your tractor, Mr. Coleman, and I will do it better than new. I believe you will, son. I believe you will. That night, lying in his bunk at Camp Hearn, Klaus Bergman stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened in the 6 weeks since his submarine died in the Atlantic. Thought about bacon and fried chicken. About Jesse Coleman and his dead son William. About the American way and what that really meant. And he thought about something Ernst Hoffman had said. What if we are on the wrong side? Klaus had no answer yet, but he was beginning to suspect. And that suspicion, terrifying as it was, felt more like truth than anything he had been told in the last 3 years. Outside Texas, stars wheeled overhead, the same stars he had known from submarine conning towers. But everything else had changed. Everything else was new. And Klaus Bergman was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, losing the war was the first step toward finding something better. Something the Americans called freedom and dignity, and the simple radical idea that every human being deserved to be treated like one, even enemies, even prisoners, even men who had fought on the wrong side of a terrible war, especially them. October 1943. Dawn broke over Coleman Ranch the way it always did in Texas, sudden and bright and merciless. Klaus Bergman stood looking at Jesse Coleman's broken tractor, a 1938 John Deere Model B, that had not run in 3 months, and felt something he had not felt since before the war. Purpose. The tractor sat behind the main barn, its green paint faded by sun, and its transmission seized from bad oil and wartime shortages. Jesse had explained the problem simply. Every mechanic in 3 counties was either overseas or working essential war industry. Parts were rationed. The tractor had died at the worst possible time right before harvest, and Jesse had been forced to borrow equipment from neighbors who could barely spare it. Otto Schneider, the machinist, walked around the tractor 3 times, his experienced eye cataloging every problem. Ernst Hoffman stood beside Klaus waiting. They had 8 hours before the truck came to take them back to Camp Hearn. 8 hours to prove that German engineering meant something beyond building weapons. Klaus knelt beside the transmission, ran his hands over cold metal. In his mind, the machinery came alive. He could see the gears that should turn but did not, could imagine the flow of oil that had stopped flowing, could understand the elegant simplicity of American farm equipment, so different from the complex precision of German military machinery, but no less sophisticated in its own way. "We can fix this," Klaus said in German, "but not in 8 hours. We need 3 weeks, maybe 4. Jesse Coleman, standing nearby with Danny Morrison translating, nodded slowly. "Then you got 3 weeks. I'll arrange it with the camp commander. You boys can stay here during the day long as the guards stay with you. Work from sun up to sundown. Fair. More than fair, Mr. Coleman." What Klaus did not say was this: fixing the tractor was not about the tractor. It was about proving something to himself, that his skills mattered, that he was more than a defeated enemy soldier, that 3 years in the Kriegsmarine had not erased the engineer he had been before the war. They started by completely disassembling the transmission, not just opening it up, taking it entirely apart. Every gear, every bearing, every seal, laying the pieces out on canvas in the barn, organizing them with the systematic precision that the German educational system had drilled into Klaus since he was a child. Otto discovered the core problem immediately. The oil that Jesse had been forced to use, cheap wartime substitute oil, had broken down under Texas heat. The resulting sludge had scored the gears and seized the bearings. Simple replacement would not work. They would need to handcraft new parts using Jesse's small forge and machine shop. It was the kind of work Klaus loved. Precise, technical, demanding total focus. For 8 hours a day, he could forget he was a prisoner, forget that Germany was losing the war, forget everything except the satisfaction of making broken things work again. On the 5th day, Jesse watched Klaus hand-filing a gear tooth, adjusting the profile by fractions of a millimeter. "Commander, you could just patch it, get it running good enough." Klaus looked up. His English was improving daily from working alongside Jesse and Danny. "In Kriegsmarine, we learn this: do job right first time or do it many times wrong. If I patch, this tractor breaks again in 6 months. If I fix right, it works for years. Why does that matter to you? You won't be here in 6 months." Klaus returned to his filing. The rasp of metal on metal filled the silence. "It matters because good work is good work. War does not change this." Jesse studied Klaus for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. But something had shifted between them. Some understanding had been reached without words. 21 days after they started, Klaus turned the key on the rebuilt tractor. The engine caught on the first try, purred like it had never been broken. Jesse climbed into the seat, worked the controls, drove the tractor in a wide circle around the barnyard. When he climbed down, he was grinning like a child on Christmas morning. "Commander, this runs better than the day I bought it new." "It should. I added improvements. Better cooling system for Texas heat. New air filter for dust. Adjusted governor for more power." Small things, but they matter. Jesse pulled out his wallet, counted out bills. $16.80. 80 cents per day for each of the three men who had worked on the tractor. Klaus stared at the money. It was more than he had held in his hands in 3 years. More than the Kriegsmarine had paid him in 6 months. American dollars, real money. Mr. Coleman, this is too much. It's what we agreed, fair pay for fair work. Now take it before I change my mind. That night at Camp Hearn, Klaus sat on his bunk counting and recounting the money. $5.60. His share, 56 days of submarine pay, earned in 21 days of honest work. He wrote a letter to Greta, told her he was alive, told her he was being treated well, did not tell her about the food or the kindness or the slow crumbling of everything he had believed about the enemy. Not yet. Those things were too big, too dangerous, too likely to be misunderstood if the letter was intercepted and read by German censors. But he enclosed half the money, $2.80, sent through the Red Cross system that somehow miraculously still functioned across a world at war, hoping it would reach her, hoping it would buy food for Marlene, the daughter he had never seen, hoping it would tell Greta something letters could not say. I am surviving, more than surviving. I am learning to live again. Word spread through Brazos County faster than Klaus expected. The German who could fix anything. The U-boat commander who had made Jesse Coleman's tractor run better than new. Request came to Coleman Ranch. Mr. Henderson's water pump had died. Could the Germans look at it? Mrs. Campbell's grain separator kept jamming. Would they know what was wrong? The Thompson Farms wind generator had stopped turning. Any chance the prisoners could help Jesse Coleman became Klaus's agent. He negotiated prices, arranged schedules, made sure the work was legal under Geneva Convention rules about prisoner labor, split the profits 60% to the prisoners, 40% to the ranch for materials and overhead. By December, Klaus had earned $127, more money than he had seen in 5 years. He sent half to Greta, kept the rest in a small wooden box under his bunk. Wondered what he would do with American money when the war ended and he went home to a Germany that would have no use for it. If he went home. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome, dangerous, but increasingly impossible to ignore. December 24th, 1943, Christmas Eve. Klaus had not celebrated Christmas in 4 years. The Kriegsmarine did not stop for holidays. U-boats did not surface to sing carols. Christmas had become just another day of gray Atlantic water and cold fear and the slow grinding awareness that every patrol might be the last. But Jesse Coleman insisted. Christmas isn't about the war, he said through Danny Morrison's increasingly unnecessary translation. Klaus's English was good enough now that he understood most things without help. It's about remembering we're all human. Now get cleaned up, dinner's at 6. The ranch house dining room had been transformed. A small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments and strings of popcorn. Candles burned on the table. The smell of roasting turkey and ham filled the house. Jesse had invited all 8 prisoners and their guards. Danny Morrison sat beside Klaus. The other guards, young men who had come to know the Germans over 3 months of daily contact, sat interspersed among the prisoners. Like this was a normal dinner party instead of something that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. The food was overwhelming. Turkey roasted to golden perfection, ham that Jesse had smoked himself over hickory wood, mashed potatoes and gravy, sweet potato casserole, green bean casserole, fresh rolls. And for dessert, Mrs. Henderson's pecan pie, legendary throughout the county. After dinner, Jesse pulled out a guitar. Klaus had not known the rancher could play. But Jesse's hands moved over the strings with the easy confidence of long practice. And when he began to sing, his voice was rough but true. He started with American carols. Silent Night, Oh Holy Night, Away in a Manger. Then to Klaus's shock, Jesse switched to German. Perfect German. The same songs in the language Klaus had not heard spoken with kindness since he left Leipzig. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alles schläft einsam wacht, Franz Weber. The young dairy farmer put his face in his hands and wept. Great shaking sobs that he could not control. Otto Schneider put an arm around the boy's shoulders. Ernst Hoffmann stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, fighting his own tears. Klaus felt his throat close, felt the years of war and fear and hunger and loss gather into something too big to contain. He had not cried since his submarine sank, had not allowed himself to feel anything except the need to survive. But now, sitting in a Texas ranch house listening to an American rancher sing German Christmas carols, Klaus Bergman broke. Silent tears, sliding down his face, unstoppable. Jesse finished the song, set down his guitar, looked at the 8 German prisoners crying in his dining room. Boys, I don't know if you'll ever see your families again. Don't know if this war will let you go home. But tonight, right now, you're not prisoners. You're just men who miss home. And that's okay. Missing home means you got something worth going back to. Franz raised his head. His young face was blotched red from crying. Mr. Coleman, why are you kind to us? Your son died. William died fighting our allies. You should hate us. Jesse stood before the photographs on the wall. His 3 boys, his late wife, his father in WWII uniform. My boys, Jackson's recovering in Australia now. Thomas still fighting in the Pacific. And William, his voice caught. William died at Tarawa because he believed America stood for something, for treating people right, for dignity. He looked at the 8 German prisoners, tears in their eyes from the Christmas carols. If I hate you boys, then William died for nothing, because I'd be betraying what he fought for. Jesse's voice strengthened. So tonight you're not prisoners. You're just men who miss home. And that's okay. That's human. He went to his desk, came back with an envelope. Klaus, this came through the Red Cross. Been holding it for tonight. Klaus took the envelope with shaking hands. The handwriting was Greta's. He had not heard from her in 8 months. 8 months of not knowing if she was alive, if his parents were alive, if Leipzig still existed, or had been bombed into rubble like so many German cities. He opened the letter carefully. It was dated in August 1943, 4 months to reach him. The miracle of mail crossing a world at war. Dearest Klaus, we received news you are alive and prisoner in America. I thank God for ours. Could not stop thanking him. Marlene is walking now. She will be 2 years old when you receive this. She has your eyes, your serious expression when she concentrates on something. Leipzig is difficult. Bombs come often. Every week we go to shelters. But we survive. Your parents are well. They moved from their apartment after the bombing. Live now with your brother's family. They are proud you survived. I am proud you are alive. That is enough. Everything else we can endure. Wait for me as I wait for you. Your loving wife, Greta. Klaus read the letter 3 times, memorized every word, then folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket over his heart. Jesse Coleman put a hand on Klaus's shoulder. You got something to live for, Commander. That makes you luckier than most. Klaus looked up at the American rancher who had lost a son but still had enough kindness left to comfort his former enemy. And Klaus understood something that would shape the rest of his life. This was what America meant. Not the propaganda version he had been taught. Not the weak, decadent nation that German newsreels mocked. But this, a man choosing kindness when he had every right to choose hatred. A nation strong enough to treat prisoners with dignity. Values deep enough to survive even war. Klaus spoke carefully, making sure Jesse understood every word. Mr. Coleman, I must ask, your 3 sons. Jackson is recovered. Yes, Thomas is with Marines in Pacific. But William, he paused, gathered courage. You have treated us with such kindness, but your son died fighting. How do you do this? Jesse sat down heavily, suddenly looked every one of his 58 years. William died at Tarawa, November last year. He was 21 years old. Died on a beach 10,000 miles from home, fighting Japanese soldiers who probably didn't want to be there any more than he did. Jesse's voice went rough. I got the telegram while you boys were still at sea, not yet captured. And I wanted to hate. God, how I wanted to hate. Wanted to hate every enemy soldier, every German, every Japanese, every Italian. Didn't matter that you didn't kill William. Didn't matter that your war wasn't his war, just wanted someone to blame. He looked directly at Klaus. But then I thought about what William believed. He didn't fight because he hated Japanese people. He fought because he believed in something. Believed America stands for treating people right, for giving everyone dignity, for being fair even when it's hard. And I realized if I start hating you boys just because you wore an enemy uniform, then William died for nothing. because I would be betraying everything he believed in. Jesse pulled out his wallet, removed a worn photograph, handed it to Klaus. William Coleman, 21 years old, impossibly young, grinning at the camera like death was something that happened to other people. Every time I'm tempted to hate you boys, I look at that picture and ask, what would William want me to do? And the answer is always the same. Do the right thing, treat people decent, be the America he believed in. Klaus handed back the photograph with trembling hands. I am honored to have known your son even through you. He must have been an exceptional man. He was, and that's why I do this. Not for you, really, for him. To prove that what he died for still matters. That moment changed everything for Klaus Bergman. Not just his understanding of America, but his understanding of what it meant to be human. To choose kindness over hatred. To honor the dead by living better than they could. To turn grief into grace. It was the most German thing Klaus had ever seen an American do, and he loved Jesse Coleman for it. The winter passed, the spring came, 1944 became 1945. The war ground on, but Klaus existed in a strange pocket of peace working on Coleman Ranch, during the day returning to Camp Hearn at night earning money and sending it home and slowly transforming from a submarine commander into something else. A mechanic, a craftsman, a man who fixed things instead of destroying them. News from Europe grew worse for Germany. The Allies invaded Normandy. Paris was liberated. The Soviet armies pushed toward Berlin. Every week brought new evidence that the war Klaus had fought for was ending in total defeat. He should have felt despair. Instead, he felt something closer to relief. Then came May 8, 1945. VE Day, victory in Europe. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The news reached Camp Hearn in the afternoon. The American guards were jubilant, celebrating in ways that made Klaus remember how young most of them were. The German prisoners were silent, stunned. Even those who had known defeat was inevitable found the reality of it crushing. That evening, Klaus's barracks was quiet as a funeral. 40 men who had fought for Germany, who had believed in victory or at least honorable peace, now faced the reality that their nation had been utterly destroyed. Ernst Hoffmann sat on his bunk face in his hands. Klaus, what happens now? Do we go home when? To what? Klaus had no answers. Reports from Germany were fragmentary but horrific. Cities in ruins, millions dead. The country divided between Soviet and Western occupation. Starvation, chaos. A nation that had started the war believing itself superior to all others, now reduced to rubble and shame. We wait, Klaus said, and we hope. But hope for what? That was the question none of them could answer. 3 weeks later, Jesse Coleman called Klaus to the ranch house office. His face was serious. On the desk lay papers that Klaus recognized as official forms stamped with American government seals. Commander, we need to talk about your future. Klaus sat down, feeling his stomach tighten. The war is over. Eventually you'll be repatriated to Germany. Could be months, could be a year, but it will happen. Jesse pushed the papers across the desk. These are immigration sponsorship forms. After you go back to Germany, after you see your family and figure out what's left there, if you decide you want to come back to America, I will sponsor you. You, your wife, your daughter. I'll give you a job here on the ranch. Help you get citizenship eventually. Klaus stared at the papers like they were written in an alien language. Mr. Coleman, I was your enemy. Was, past tense. Now you're the best damn mechanic in 3 counties and a friend. Klaus America was built by immigrants. Germans, Irish, Italians, every group that was hated when they first arrived and then became American. Why not one more German who knows the value of hard work? But William, your son died fighting this war. Jesse's face hardened, but not with anger, with determination. William died fighting tyranny, not Germans. There's a difference. He died believing that America should be a place where good men can build good lives regardless of where they were born. If I don't offer you this, then I'm saying William was wrong, and I won't do that. Klaus picked up the papers, scanned them. His engineer's mind cataloged the requirements, the process, the possibilities. Scanned them again, looking for the trap, the trick, the hidden cruelty that would make this kindness make sense. Found nothing. I do not know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Go home first. See your family. See what Germany is now, then decide. But Klaus, I want you to know this. You got a place here if you want it. You and Greta and Marlene. You got a home in Texas if Germany can't be home anymore. Klaus folded the papers carefully, put them in his pocket next to Greta's last letter. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I will think about this. But Klaus was already thinking, already calculating, already understanding that Jesse Coleman had just offered him something more valuable than money or safety. A second chance, a new life, a future. The question was whether Klaus Bergman had the courage to take it. The months after WWII were strange. The war was over, but the prisoners remained prisoners. Repatriation was slow, complicated by the chaos in Europe, by the division of Germany between Soviet and Western zones, by the sheer logistics of moving hundreds of thousands of prisoners across an ocean. Klaus continued working at Coleman Ranch, continued earning money, continued sending half to Greta and saving the rest, continued learning what it meant to be American without quite admitting that was what he was doing. He wrote to Greta about Jesse's offer, wrote carefully knowing German censors might still read letters even after the war, wrote asking her to consider this, Germany is broken. It will take decades to rebuild. Or we can start a new life where there is hope and opportunity. Her reply came in August. Klaus opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Klaus, your letter filled me with hope and terror in equal measure. Hope because you are alive and have opportunities I cannot imagine. Terror because you are asking me to leave everything I know. My sister is here. Your parents are in Leipzig, trapped in the Soviet zone. Marlene knows only Germany. How can we leave? But Klaus, I trust you. If you say there is a future in America, I believe you. Do not ask me to decide now. Come home first. Let me see you. Let Marlene meet her father. Then we will decide together. I love you, Greta. Klaus read the letter 10 times, understood what it said and what it did not say. Greta was afraid but willing to trust him, willing to consider the impossible. It would have to be enough. October 1945. 2 years and 5 months after Klaus Bergman arrived in Texas as a prisoner, he boarded a transport ship in Norfolk, Virginia, heading back to Germany, back to a country he had left believing it would conquer the world, returning to a nation defeated, divided, destroyed. Jesse Coleman drove Klaus to the train station. They did not speak much. All the important things had already been said. At the platform, Jesse handed Klaus an envelope. Don't open it until you get to Germany. But Klaus, remember this. You got a home here. Always. War's over. You're not my enemy anymore. You're my friend, and I take care of my friends. They shook hands. Then impulsively, Jesse pulled Klaus into an embrace. Two men who should have been enemies, who had been enemies, who had become something better. Come back, Klaus. Come back and bring your family. Texas needs good men. Klaus could not speak, could only nod. Then he boarded the train and America disappeared behind him. But it did not disappear from his heart. That would prove impossible. Because Klaus Bergman had learned something in 2 years in Texas that 28 years in Germany had never taught him. What it meant to be free. What it meant to be valued for work rather than ideology. What it meant to be treated with dignity, even by those who had every right to hate you. He had learned what America really was. Not the propaganda version, not the newsreel mockery, but the lived experience of a nation that believed, however imperfectly, that every person deserved a chance. And Klaus Bergman wanted that chance, wanted it for himself, for Greta, for Marlene, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him. But first he had to go home, had to see what remained of Germany, had to find his family in the ruins. Then if they agreed, if Greta could be brave enough and Marlene young enough to adapt, he would do something that a year ago would have been unthinkable. He would come back to Texas, would become an immigrant to the nation he had fought against, would build a new life in the place that had shown him more kindness as an enemy than his own country had shown him as a loyal officer. The ship sailed east, toward Europe, toward Germany, toward a reckoning with the past and a future Klaus could barely imagine. But in his pocket he carried two things, Greta's letter and Jesse Coleman's envelope. And in his heart he carried something else, something new, something that 2 years in Texas had planted and nurtured until it grew too strong to uproot. Hope, October 1945, Hamburg Harbor. Klaus Bergman stood on the deck of a converted Liberty ship, watching Germany emerge from morning fog, and what he saw made his stomach turn to ice. The harbor was a graveyard. Sunken ships jutted from the water like the ribs of dead giants. Cranes stood frozen in positions they had held since the last bombing raid. Buildings along the waterfront were hollow shells, walls standing without roofs, windows gaping empty at the gray sky. This was not the Germany Klaus had left 3 years ago. This was something else, something broken beyond immediate repair. The other prisoners crowded the rail beside him. Ernst Hoffmann, who had survived 8 patrols only to return to this. Otto Schneider, who had joked about going back to his machine shop in Stuttgart. Franz Weber, who wanted only to see his family farm in Bavaria. None of them spoke. There were no words adequate to what they were seeing. The processing took 2 days. British occupation authorities checked papers, recorded information, assigned travel permits, based on which zone each prisoner needed to reach. Klaus's papers said Stuttgart American Zone, where Greta had written she was living with her sister. The train journey south was worse than the harbor. Every city they passed through showed the same devastation. Bremen was rubble. Hanover was ruins. Frankfurt was a landscape of broken stone and twisted metal. And everywhere people. Thin people. Desperate people. People who looked at the returning prisoners with expressions Klaus could not read. Not quite hatred, not quite hope. Something emptier than either. Stuttgart was 60% destroyed. Klaus stood at the main station with his single bag of possessions and tried to recognize a city he had visited before the war. Found nothing familiar. The station itself was a temporary structure built among the ruins of the original. The streets were partially cleared but lined with rubble piles that would take years to move. Greta's sister lived in what had been a nice neighborhood before the war. Now it was a collection of damaged buildings, some repaired enough to live in, others waiting for materials and labor that might never come. Klaus found the address, climbed 3 flights of stairs in a building that smelled of mildew and cabbage, and too many people living too close together. Knocked on a door that had been patched with mismatched wood. Greta opened the door. For a moment, Klaus did not recognize his own wife. She had been 26 when he left, young and beautiful and full of hope. The woman standing before him was 31 but looked 40. Thin in a way that spoke of hunger, not health. Hair streaked with gray. Lines around her eyes that had not been there before. But her eyes were still Greta's. Still held love and strength and the stubborn determination that had made Klaus fall for her 10 years ago. Klaus, that was all she said, his name. But the way she said it contained everything. 3 years of fear, 3 years of not knowing if he was alive, 3 years of waiting and hoping and surviving. They held each other in the doorway while Greta cried silently into his shoulder. Klaus felt her bones through her dress, felt how little of her remained after 3 years of wartime rations and post-war starvation, felt his heart break for what the war had done to her. A small voice from inside the apartment. "Mama, who is that man?" Klaus looked past Greta. A little girl stood in the middle of the room, 5 years old, blonde hair and pigtails, wearing a dress that had been mended many times, looking at Klaus with Greta's eyes and Klaus's serious expression. Marlene, his daughter, the child he had never met. Greta wiped her eyes, stepped back, held Klaus's hand. "Marlene, this is your papa, the one I told you about. He has come home." Marlene studied Klaus with the careful wariness of a child who had learned not to trust easily. She had been 2 when the war ended, had lived her entire life with bombs and shortages and fear, had learned to be cautious. Klaus knelt down, made himself small and unthreatening. "Hello, Marlene, I am very happy to meet you." Marlene did not come closer, but she did not run away either. "Mama says you were on a boat. Were you on a boat?" "Yes, a submarine under the water." "That sounds scary." Sometimes it was. Marlene considered this, then with the directness of children, asked the question that mattered. "Are you going to stay now, or are you going away again?" Klaus looked at Greta, saw the same question in her eyes, saw her fear that he would leave again, saw her desperate hope that this time would be different. "I am staying," Klaus said. "I am never leaving again." That first night after Marlene fell asleep in the corner of the single room that served as bedroom for all of them, Klaus and Greta sat at the small table and talked. really talked for the first time in 3 years. Klaus told her everything. The submarine, the capture, Texas, Jesse Coleman, the work on the ranch, the food, the kindness, the offer of immigration. Greta listened without interrupting. When Klaus finished, she was silent for a long time. This Jesse Coleman, he really offered to sponsor us, to bring us to America. Yes, even though his son died in the war. Because his son did win the war. He wants to honor William's memory by doing what William believed was right. Greta looked around the single room they shared with her sister's family. 4 adults and 2 children in a space meant for one family. Looked at the patched walls and the single window that did not quite close and the cast iron stove that barely kept them warm. Klaus, I want to say yes. Want to say we should go immediately, but my sister is here. Your parents are in Leipzig in the Soviet zone. We cannot even visit them. And Marlene barely knows you. How can we take her to a foreign country where she knows nothing and no one? Klaus reached across the table, took Greta's thin hands in his. I understand. We will rebuild here, together. I will find work. We will survive. But even as he said it, Klaus knew the truth. Survival was not the same as living. And Germany, broken and divided and occupied, might never again be the place it had been. The years that followed were the hardest of Klaus Bergmann's life. Harder than the submarine patrols. Harder than being a prisoner. Because now he had something to lose. Greta and Marlene. And every day was a fight to keep them fed and safe and warm. He found work at a machine shop in Stuttgart. The owner, Herr Weber, was desperate for skilled mechanics who knew both German and American equipment. The Marshall Plan was flooding West Germany with American machinery, but few Germans understood how to maintain it. Klaus's 2 years working on Texas farm equipment made him invaluable. But the pay was a quarter of what he would have earned before the war. And everything was expensive. Food was rationed. Fuel was rationed. Clothing required special coupons. The black market thrived, but Klaus refused to use it. He had learned in Texas what honest work meant, and he would not compromise that now. Greta took in sewing to supplement their income. She worked late into the night mending clothes for families who could afford to pay. Her hands became raw from the needle and thread, but she never complained. Marlene attended school in a temporary building, classes held in shifts because there were not enough rooms for all the children. She was smart, frighteningly smart, with Klaus's head for numbers and Greta's gift for languages. But she was also quiet, watchful, old beyond her years in the way children of war always were. Klaus applied for Jesse Coleman's immigration sponsorship in 1947. The application was denied. The United States was not accepting German immigrants yet. Too soon after the war, too much anger, too many Americans who had lost sons and brothers and fathers. He applied again in 1949 after Germany split into East and West. Denied again. The Cold War was beginning. Germans were suspect, especially former military men, even submarine commanders who had fought against the Western Allies rather than the Soviets. That same year, Klaus's parents became unreachable. The border between East and West Germany hardened into something impermeable. His father's last letter, smuggled out through friends, said simply, "Do not come here. There is no future under Soviets. Build your life in the West. We will manage." Klaus never heard from them again. The Korean War started in 1950. Klaus applied for immigration again. Denied. America was at war again. German applications were frozen indefinitely. Klaus began to lose hope. Jesse Coleman wrote regularly letters taking months to arrive, but always carrying the same message. Do not give up, Commander. Times are hard now, but they will change. America still wants good men like you. But Klaus was 37 years old, working 60 hours a week for wages that barely fed his family. Watching Greta grow thinner and grayer despite the Marshall Plan aid that was supposed to be helping Germany recover. Watching Marlene grow up in a country that had lost its soul and might never find it again. He wondered if Texas had been a dream, if Jesse Coleman had been real, if any of it had happened at all. Then came January 1956. A letter arrived with American stamps. Klaus almost did not open it. Was tired of hope, tired of disappointment. But Greta insisted. Dear Klaus, long time no write. Been dealing with health problems. Heart trouble, doctors say. Jackson runs the ranch now. I am mostly retired, but I got news that matters. New immigration law passed last year. Skilled workers with American sponsors can apply for visas. Real visas, not just applications that get denied. I sent the forms with this letter. Fill them out. Come home to Texas. Time is running short for me, and I would like to see you again before I meet my maker. Your friend Jesse. Klaus read the letter 3 times, looked at Greta, saw tears streaming down her face. We have to go, Greta said. Klaus, we owe him this. We owe ourselves this. Marlene deserves better than this. What about your sister? Your life here? My sister is settled, has her own family. Marlene is finishing school this year. And you? Greta reached across the table, gripped Klaus's hands with surprising strength. You have been dying slowly here for 10 years, dreaming of Texas, working yourself to exhaustion for poverty wages. It is time to live that dream. Klaus looked at Marlene, now 16 years old, studying at the table. She looked up, met his eyes. Papa Mama has told me about Texas since I was little, about the rancher who was kind to you, about the food and the work and the opportunities. I want to see it, want to see the place that made you smile when you talk about it. Klaus had not realized he smiled when he talked about Texas, had not realized how transparent his longing had become. He filled out the forms that night, sent them within the week, and this time, miraculously and possibly, the answer came back. Yes, September 1956. Klaus Bergman, 43 years old, stood on the deck of a passenger ship, watching the Statue of Liberty grow larger on the horizon. Beside him, Greta held his hand with desperate intensity. Behind them, Marlene pressed against the rail, eyes wide with wonder. Papa, is this really happening? Yes, Liebling, this is really happening. They processed through Ellis Island, took a train south and west, watched America unfold outside the windows, vast and prosperous and alive in ways that made Klaus's chest ache. This was what he remembered. This was what he had tried to explain to Greta and failed. This sense of possibility, of movement, of a nation that believed in tomorrow more than it mourned yesterday. Texas appeared on the third day. That flat horizon, that endless sky, that quality of light that existed nowhere else on earth. Klaus felt something unlock inside him, something that had been frozen since he left 11 years ago. He was coming home, to a place he had been a prisoner, to a nation he had fought against, but home nonetheless. Coleman Ranch looked exactly as Klaus remembered, the windmill turning slowly in the breeze, the barns weathered but maintained, the house solid and permanent and welcoming. Jesse Coleman stood at the gate, 71 years old now, thin in a way that spoke of illness, not age, moving slowly, carefully, like a man conscious that his body might betray him at any moment. But his eyes were still Jesse's, still held strength and kindness and that quality of absolute integrity that had first made Klaus trust him 13 years ago. Klaus stepped out of the car, stood facing Jesse across 6 feet of Texas dust, felt 11 years collapse into nothing. Mr. Coleman? Commander Bergman? They looked at each other, 2 men who should have remained enemies, who had become something better, who had proved that human decency could survive even war. Then Jesse smiled, that slow Texas smile Klaus remembered. Welcome home, Klaus. Klaus could not speak, could only cross the distance between them and embrace Jesse Coleman like the father he had lost to the Soviet zone. Felt Jesse's thin frame shake with emotion. Felt his own tears finally come after 11 years of holding them back. Thank you, Klaus whispered. Thank you for not forgetting me. How could I forget you? You fixed my tractor better than new. Man who does that kind of work deserves remembering. They both laughed through their tears. Then Jesse turned to Greta and Marlene. Mrs. Bergman, I am honored to finally meet you. Your husband has told me so much about you in his letters. Greta curtsied, old-fashioned and European. Jesse took her hand gently. Welcome to Texas, ma'am. I hope you will be happy here. If it is half as wonderful as Klaus described, I know I will be. Jesse knelt down with difficulty to Marlene's height. And you must be Marlene, 16 years old. Your father says you are good with numbers. Marlene, shy but determined, spoke in careful English. Yes, sir, I like mathematics and engineering. Jesse's face lit up. Engineering, just like your father. Well, Miss Marlene, Texas A&M University has an engineering program. Not many women in it yet, but that is changing. If you want to study engineering, we will make it happen. Marlene looked at her father with shining eyes. Klaus nodded. Yes, in America even this was possible. A German girl studying engineering at an American university. Impossible in Europe. Normal here, Mauricio. That first year back in Texas passed in a blur of adjustment and wonder. Klaus worked as head mechanic at Coleman Ranch, maintaining equipment not just for Jesse, but for a dozen surrounding farms. His reputation had survived 11 years. The German who fixed things better than new. He earned more in 1 month than he had earned in 6 months in Stuttgart. Not because wages were higher, though they were, but because his skills were valued, because honest work received honest pay, because in America what mattered was what you could do, not where you were born. Greta found her place more slowly. The language was harder for her, the culture more foreign, but the Lutheran Church in Bryan had a German-speaking congregation, immigrants from the 19th century who still maintained old country traditions. She found community there, found work at the local library, eventually began teaching German at the high school because the Cold War had made languages valuable again. Marlene bloomed, enrolled at Texas A&M in 1957, one of only 12 women in the engineering program. She faced skepticism, condescension, and outright hostility from male students and professors who believed women had no place in technical fields. But she had something they did not. She had grown up in bombed-out Stuttgart, had survived poverty and hunger and dislocation, had crossed an ocean to start over in a foreign country. A few sexist professors were nothing compared to that. She graduated with honors in 1961, got a job offer from NASA, newly formed and desperately seeking talent for the space program, moved to Houston, sent letters home filled with excitement about rockets and trajectories and orbital mechanics. Klaus read those letters with pride, so fierce it made his chest hurt. His daughter, working for the American space program, helping send Americans to space. This was possible. This was real. This was America. They became citizens in 1958. Klaus, Greta, and Marlene stood in a courtroom in Bryan, Texas, right hands raised, swearing allegiance to a nation that had once been their enemy. The judge, an older man who had served in World War I, asked Klaus a question. Mr. Bergman, you fought against America. Why do you want to become American now? Klaus had prepared for this question, had thought about it for 13 years, since that first breakfast of bacon and eggs aboard USS Bainbridge. Your Honor, I fought for a country I thought I understood. I lost that war, but I won something more valuable. Understanding of what makes a nation truly great. Not military power, not economic strength, but how a nation treats its people, all its people, even its enemies. America treated me, a prisoner who tried to sink American ships, with dignity and fairness. That is worth fighting for. That is worth swearing allegiance to. That is worth spending the rest of my life defending. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge had tears in his eyes. He granted their citizenship with a flourish of his pen and a handshake that lasted longer than necessary. Welcome home, Mr. Bergman. America is lucky to have you. But even as Klaus celebrated citizenship, Jesse Coleman was dying. Heart disease, the doctor said. Years of hard work in Texas heat and grief over William had weakened his heart beyond repair. He moved slowly now, tired easily, spent most of his days on the ranch house porch, watching the land he loved but could no longer work. Klaus visited him every evening after work. They sat in comfortable silence mostly, sometimes talking about the ranch, sometimes about the old days at Camp Hearn, sometimes about nothing important at all. One evening in 1960, Jesse called Klaus to sit beside him. Klaus, I need to tell you something. Back in '45, when I offered to sponsor you, I did not do it out of charity. I know, Jesse, you needed a good mechanic. No, Jesse's voice was firm despite his weakness. I did it because of William. He paused, gathering strength. Week before William shipped out to the Pacific, we had a big argument. He wanted to study engineering, maybe become a teacher. I wanted him to run the ranch. Told him Coleman men are ranchers, always have been. We parted on bad terms. He died angry at me. Jesse's voice broke. When you boys showed up at the camp, smart and skilled and willing to learn, I saw what William could have been. And I thought maybe this is God giving me a chance to do right by somebody else's son, since I failed my own. Klaus felt his throat close. Jesse, you did not fail William. He died a hero. Maybe, but I failed him as a father by not listening, so I listened to you boys instead. And you know what? You taught me more than I taught you. You taught me that enemy is just a label governments put on people. Remove the label, you are just men trying to survive. Jesse gripped Klaus's hand with surprising strength. You gave me a second chance at being a father, Klaus. Thank you for that. Klaus could not speak, could only hold Jesse's hand and cry silently for the man who had saved him twice. Once from the ocean, once from despair. Jesse Coleman died February 3rd, 1962, peacefully in his sleep. His sons Jackson and Thomas at his bedside. Klaus arrived too late to say goodbye, but in time to help prepare the funeral. 400 people attended. The largest funeral Brazos County had ever seen. Veterans from 2 wars, former prisoners of war who had immigrated to America, local families, and Klaus Bergman, who delivered the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit looking out at the sea of faces and spoke from his heart. Jesse Coleman taught me that courage is not about fighting enemies. It is about loving them until they become friends. He could have hated me. He had every right. His son died in war my country helped start, but he chose differently. He chose to see me as a man, not just an enemy, as someone who could be redeemed, not just defeated. Klaus's voice strengthened. Jesse built a bridge between nations with simple tools: fairness, dignity, hard work, friendship. This is the Texas way. This is the American way. And this is the way I will live the rest of my life to honor the man who saved me twice. Once from the ocean that tried to drown me. Once from the despair that tried to consume me. He looked at Jesse's coffin draped with an American flag. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for showing me what America really means. I will not forget. I will not let others forget. And I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed me. The years passed. Marlene graduated from Texas. I and Meo went to work for NASA, met a young engineer named James Mitchell, grandson of a World War II veteran. They fell in love over orbital calculations and rocket trajectories. They married in 1964 at Coleman Ranch. Jackson Coleman, Jesse's son, hosted the reception. 50 former German prisoners attended those who had immigrated to America and made new lives here. The local newspaper covered it from enemies to family. The Texas miracle. Klaus danced with his daughter at the reception, looked around at the celebration. Americans and Germans, former enemies now family, and understood something Jesse had tried to teach him 20 years ago. This was what won the war, not weapons, not tactics, not industrial capacity, but this, the ability to turn enemies into friends, to choose kindness over hatred, to believe that human beings were more than their worst moments. In 1965, Klaus received a letter from Germany, from Hans Muller, an old U-boat crew member who had stayed in Hamburg after the war. Dear Klaus, I hope this letter finds you well in Texas. I write with difficult news. Ernst Hoffman passed away last month. Heart attack. He was only 57. He spoke of you often and of our time in Texas. He never forgot Jesse Coleman's kindness. His last words to his family were, "Tell Klaus I understood why he stayed. America offered something Germany could not. Hope. I am old now, Klaus, and I wonder, did we choose the right paths? You chose America. I chose Germany. My Germany is better now, rebuilt, prosperous, democratic. But I wonder if it would have been different if more men like Jesse Coleman existed here. Please write if you can. Your old friend Hans," Klaus wrote back immediately. "Dear Hans, I am sorry about Ernst. He was a good man, a brave officer, a true friend. You ask if we chose the right paths. I think there is no right or wrong, only different. You stayed to rebuild Germany. That was courageous. I came to America to build a new life. That was necessary for my family. But here is the truth, Hans. Good men exist everywhere. Jesse Coleman existed in Germany too. His name was my father. Your father. Ernst, you. War makes us forget this. Peace reminds us. I am glad Germany rebuilt. I am glad you had a life there. And I am glad I have a life here. We both won hands. We survived. That is enough. Your friend Klaus." September 15th, 1983. 40 years to the day since Klaus Bergman first arrived at Camp Hearn, Texas. Coleman Ranch hosted a memorial event. 40th anniversary of the POW camp. Historical marker dedication. Reunion of former prisoners and guards. Klaus stood at the gate, 70 years old now, white-haired but still strong, still carrying himself like the engineer and craftsman he had always been. Beside him, Greta, 69, silver-haired and beautiful in the way women become beautiful when life has tested them and they have not broken. Behind them, Marlene, 43 years old, senior engineer at NASA, two children of her own, Americans who knew their grandfather had once been the enemy and loved him for it. The cars began arriving. Franz Weber, now 60, owner of the largest dairy operation in the county. Otto Schneider, 73, retired but still sharp. Danny Morrison, that Iowa farm boy who had served Klaus Bacon 40 years ago, now 59 and gray, but still with those same innocent eyes. They embraced like brothers, former enemies, former captors and prisoners. Now simply old men who shared history and understood what it meant. The historical marker was unveiled. Bronze plaque mounted on Texas granite. Camp Hearn, POW, Camp 1942 to 1945. Here, 50,000 German prisoners of war learned that America's strength lies not in its weapons, but in its values. Many stayed to become citizens. All left as friends. Klaus was asked to speak. He stood before the crowd of 200 former prisoners and guards and families and spoke the truth that had taken 40 years to fully understand. 40 years ago, I came here expecting hell. I found heaven, not because Texas was perfect. It was hot, foreign, difficult. But because I met men like Jesse Coleman and Danny Morrison and families of Brazos County who taught me that humanity survives even in war. He paused, looking at the faces before him. Saw understanding, saw agreement, saw the shared knowledge that something miraculous had happened here. Jesse told me once, war makes enemies, but it does not have to make monsters. I have lived by those words. My daughter works for NASA, helping send Americans to space. My grandchildren are Americans, proud of their German heritage, but more proud of their American values. This happened because one Texas rancher decided that kindness was stronger than hate. Klaus's voice strengthened with conviction. I came here as Oberleutnant of the Kriegsmarine. I stand before you now as Klaus Bergmann, American citizen, Texas resident, and living proof that Jesse Coleman was right. Good men are good men, regardless of where they are born. And America at its best recognizes this truth and lives by it. The crowd stood and applauded, not polite applause, real emotion. Recognition that they had all been part of something important, something that proved human beings could be better than war demanded them to be. After the ceremony, Klaus drove alone to the Coleman family cemetery on the ranch. Jesse's grave stood under a live oak tree, the stone weathered by 21 Texas summers, but still legible. Jesse Coleman, 1885 to 1962. Rancher, father, friend. He chose kindness over hatred and changed lives because of it. Klaus placed something on the grave. His Iron Cross earned for bravery in the Battle of the Atlantic. The medal he had been proud of once before he understood what real courage meant. You earned this more than I did, my friend. You faced a harder enemy than I ever did. Your own grief, your own anger, your own desire for revenge. And you defeated them all with kindness. That is true courage. The sun set over Texas prairie, golden light painting the land in shades of amber and rose. The same sunset Klaus had watched 40 years ago from Camp Hearn. The same light that had illuminated his first real understanding of what America could be. He stood at Jesse's grave and felt gratitude so deep it was almost painful. Gratitude for bacon and fried chicken, for honest work and fair pay, for a second chance and a new life, for Jesse Coleman and all the other Americans who had chosen to see humanity instead of enemies. Klaus Bergmann lived to 92, dying peacefully in 2005, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. All Americans, all proud of the grandfather who had crossed an ocean twice, once as an enemy, once as a friend. Greta followed in 2008 at 94, her last words a whispered thank you to Klaus for bringing her to Texas. Marlene became one of NASA's first female chief engineers working on the Space Shuttle program, retiring with honors in 2010. Franz Weber's dairy operation became the foundation of a regional cooperative that still bears his name. Of the 50,000 German POWs held in America during the World War II, approximately 5,000 returned as immigrants. They became citizens, built businesses, raised families, and never forgot the treatment they received as prisoners. Camp Hearn is gone now, the barracks demolished, the guard towers removed, but the land remembers. And on that land stands Texas A&M University Research Facility, training the next generation of engineers and scientists and leaders, including the great-grandchildren of Klaus Bergmann. Americans with German names and Texas accents who know their family story and understand what it means. That America at its best is not about where you come from, but what you believe. Not about defeating enemies, but about transforming them into friends. Not about military might, but about the simple radical idea that every human being deserves dignity. Jesse Coleman's choice 40 years ago to treat prisoners with kindness changed thousands of lives, proved that values matter more than victory. That character defines nations more than conquest. That the real strength of America lies not in its weapons, but in its willingness to give even former enemies a second chance. That lesson remains true today, as true in 2025 as it was in 1943, as relevant in a world still struggling with hatred and division as it was in a world at war. Values matter, character matters, kindness matters. These are the things that make America worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth becoming a citizen of, even when you were born somewhere else. Klaus Bergmann learned this lesson as a prisoner in Texas, lived it as an immigrant in Panama, passed it to his children and grandchildren as the most important inheritance he could give them. And that legacy continues, growing, spreading, proving that Jesse Coleman was right. War makes enemies, but it does not have to make monsters. And sometimes if we are brave enough to choose kindness over hatred, enemies can become friends, even across oceans, even across wars, even across 40 years of history and memory and the slow, difficult work of choosing to see humanity in those we were taught to hate. That is the American promise. Not perfect, not always kept, but worth believing in, worth fighting for, worth becoming.